Hello and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar, The Curious Case of South Mumbai Civil Society, State, Governance and Urban Conservation in Mumbai. It's incredible to see that people have tuned in from several parts of the world today, including Germany, France, UK, and the United States. Thank you so much for being here to explore a topic that is so dear to people all the way over in Mumbai. In this webinar today, we'll be talking about two distinct neighborhoods in Mumbai that appeared in their modern avatars in the 1930s. These are the Art Deco precincts along the Oval Maidan and Marine Drive in South Mumbai, and the ones in the Dadar-Matunga, a neighborhood further north. Over the years, as many of you may know, the Art Deco buildings in Dadar-Matunga have gradually fallen into disrepair or have succumbed to redevelopment, while in South Mumbai, we see that the Art Deco buildings, along with the neo-Gothic structures, of course, have become a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2018. This, of course, is a result of persistent and painstaking advocacy for over a decade, which has been led by the neighbourhoods civil society. Our guest today, Dr. Kamalika Banerjee, as many of you may have already seen in the descriptions of our talk, is a teaching assistant at the Department of Sociology, National University of Singapore, from where she also completed her PhD. Her thesis engaged in an intra-urban comparative research in Mumbai and analyzed the divergent spatial evolution of these two predominantly middle-class residential precincts in the city of Mumbai. As part of her doctoral dissertation, Kamalika has spent several years exploring what drives South Mumbai civil participation and seeks to understand what led to such a difference in approach towards lived spaces and urban conservation in two middle-class neighborhoods of the same city. We look forward to Kamalika providing us with unique insights as a sociologist on the psyche of these two neighborhoods we will be discussing today.
Good evening. So today's talk is titled The Curious Case of the South Mumbai Civil Society, State, Governance and Urban Conservation in Mumbai. I started my PhD fieldwork in 2015 and PhD fieldwork I started in 2017. I started my graduate program in 2015. Now, I was torn between how I wanted to do today's talk, also because I'm condensing like a 300-page thesis in a 45-minute talk. So I decided, and also with the help of some of my friends who advised me how to do this, I decided to talk more about my personal experiences and also draw a little bit from the thesis as I go along. I've anonymized most of my interlocutors in this talk. They repose their trust and faith in me and share a treasure trove of information. And I thought the best way to avoid hurting other people's sentiments and theirs, and also to kind of avoid other controversies, I just decided to anonymize them. Also, if there are factual inaccuracies and other problems that you find in my talk, please get in touch with me. I take full responsibility of the information that I share here, and I'm also here to learn. I grew up in provincial Calcutta in the 90s as a dark-complexioned woman, experiencing blatant and unapologetic racism. I migrated to Mumbai in 2011 to pursue an MPhil at TIS. The city embraced me on my arrival like Calcutta never did. Like it embraces hundreds of migrants who flock the city every day to become actors, to start afresh, to escape their feudal parochial societies in other parts of the country, to work as seasonal migrant laborers or as Ola and Uber drivers for better pay, etc. The city became my home for the next 4 years, my muse and the locus of my long-term research focus and my poetic sensibilities for the next decade, and hopefully will remain one of my key research sites for the years to come. My PhD research is an ode to the beautiful city and its relentlessly committed citizens to making it livable, a city that is put together by the common people. My first brush with the middle class happened during my MPhil research on the aesthetic violence that street vendors encounter every day. There is a sizable body of literature on the new middle class in India and their anti-poor and pro-state sentiments. However, I discovered that the urban poor and the street vendors perceive the lower-rung municipality officers and the police as their ally, and the elite residents in Bandra as their real adversary. The secretaries of the locality management groups echoed a similar narrative. It is in my conversations with the residents in Bandra that I realized the anxieties of the elites as the city is giving into redevelopment and old neighborhoods are gentrifying, resulting in a destruction of the fabric, culture, and environment of the city. So when Professor N. Jairam at TIS suggested me to work on urban conservation in Mumbai when I was preparing to apply for graduate studies abroad, I jumped at the opportunity. I realized that Mumbai is the first Indian city to legislate heritage preservation under the stellar leadership of Shyam Chainani and his NGO, the Bombay Environment Action Group. I found that quite curious, owing to how heritage preservation provides a halting logic to the incessant growth and development in Mumbai, where land is a precious commodity. Also, because many of the buildings in Oval Maidan and Marine Drive are rent control protected, where tenants pay significantly less than the market rates. So how and why did the building owners decide on getting the Grade 3 recognition as they continued working for the UNESCO nomination? And three, the preservation of living heritage in India is not incentivized by the government and restricts renovation and repair work, something that my interlocutors in both the neighborhoods harped on over the last 4 or 5 years. And that is how the foundation of my doctoral research was laid. My PhD research, titled Thinking Through the Post-Colonial Neighborhood, Jugaad Politics and the Everyday Production of Space in Mumbai, undertakes an intra-urban comparative study where I study the neighborhoods of Dadar-Matunga region and 2 precincts in South Mumbai. Now, I call this Dadar-Matunga region because the BIT scheme called them suburbs of Scheme 5, but they are not suburbs anymore. They are also like the heart of the city. So after consulting with some professors here who also know Bombay, we decided to call it Dadar-Matunga region. Through a historical socio-geographical analysis of the divergent spatial evolution of the 2 neighborhoods over a century since the 1896 plague, an analysis of the public religion, their everyday state society contestations in the 2 neighborhoods, I argued that the middle class in post-colonial Mumbai, through their spatial practices and neighborhood management, thwart the neoliberal project and occupy the political space of the state because of decentralization of governance and creation of invited channels as Bhagidari scheme in Delhi and advanced locality management bodies in Mumbai to galvanize urban governance. These are the 2 neighborhoods that I explore. So the one that you see in the northern part of the city, like compared to the South Mumbai, they constitute the 4 neighborhoods in the Dadar-Matunga region, that is Shivaji Park, Matunga, Dadar Parsi Colony and Hindu Colony. In the south, there are 2 neighborhoods of Oval Maidan and Marine Drive that I concentrate on. I look at 3 planks of public sphere: the iconic architecture, the spirit of public religion and public political theology, and the civil society activism, and how it also involves the wider public sphere in South Mumbai. For today's talk, I'm mostly going to focus on the iconic architecture and the civil society activism part, because the public religion and political theological part are too academic and esoteric. So I'm just like leaving it from this discussion today. Now, before I delve into the presentation, I want to discuss what new middle class is. So the term was first coined by Leela Fernandez, who defined that as like a group of people that kind of represents a shift from the older ideology of state socialism to a political culture that is centered on a middle class based culture of consumption. This social group refers to a culturally constructed category. Advertising and media images have contributed to the creation of this image of the liberalizing middle class as a social group that has transcended the limits of state protection and austerity associated with Nehruvian and Gandhian visions of the Indian nation. The new middle class is a social group that embodies a cultural standard associated with the globalizing Indian nation. Now, Leela Fernandez does not provide like a rigid boundary of the group. So I have in my thesis kind of like tweaked with the concept and defined why I perceive of both the community of people in Dadar-Matunga region and South Mumbai as the new middle class. My interviews reveal that the first generation of settlers in both precincts were predominantly middle class, and the following generations attained considerable social mobility, as with most middle class communities in India. As an educated group of people who traverse multiple worlds in the social, cultural, and political landscape of India, the new middle class is an important player in shaping the grammar of politics, advocacy, and urban governance in India. Now, what is so curious about the South Mumbai civil society? So when I first started my fieldwork, I attributed the difference to economic difference. I went to Mumbai to prove a hypothesis. Instead, I returned to Singapore with more questions than I had initially set out with. First, I realized that the difference between the socio-economic class in the two neighborhoods is either narrow or nearly absent. Also, as one South Mumbai resident asked me, what has class got to do with it? It's an economic category. Heritage preservation and urban conservation need money, yes, but need a different sensibility altogether. And he is right. Most importantly, several participants in the Dadar-Matunga region did not buy the economic theory. I often heard the word greed there, where pro-conservation owners and tenants told me how they failed owing to some greedy tenants who live abroad, own houses abroad, and still do not contribute to maintaining the buildings and want compensation if the buildings go for redevelopment. When I probed further, residents gave me a range of theories. That South Mumbai people are more elite and more affluent, so can afford to preserve the buildings, even when tenants do not cooperate and pay meager rents compared to the market rate. But that is untenable because that in itself refutes the neoliberal logic that Leela Fernandez defines about the new middle class. Two, South Mumbai people have better understanding of architecture and aesthetics than the residents in the Dadar-Matunga region. This is partly true, not in the sense that South Mumbai residents have better sense of aesthetics. It is more Western than the communities who live in other parts of the city. By virtue of growing up in the colonial core, the gaze and life walls of the people in South Mumbai have been educated to appreciate forms of art and architecture that are not native or indigenous to India. Three, buildings in South Mumbai have used up their floor space index, so has less building potential than North Mumbai. Some of the architects in the city also pointed out that South Mumbai falls under the coastal regulation zone, which further limits the building potential. Now, both these arguments are again untenable. In 2009, when Z Group acquired a building, Vasant Sagar, in Marine Drive, they got the permission to exceed the height restriction of 24 meters to build up to 61.3 meters. Now, if that would have happened, then FSI would definitely have been diluted. Also, the coastal regulation zone, accordingly, which is supposed to protect coastal regions, fishing habitats, and intertidal areas, were also favorably amended and for Vasant Sagar. Also, in 2014, noted environment journalist Nauzar Bharucha have discussed in Times of India about the dilution of Maharashtra Coastal Zone Management Authority, where the coast was declared a bay, doing away with all forms of building restrictions. So the residents who are handling the court case, and I will attend to that in the next segment of my talk, told me that if Vasant Sagar would have actually gone up, then the whole ward would have fallen into redevelopment. So this revelation once again puts the buildings in the Dadar-Matunga region and South Mumbai on the same field. The only significant difference lay in bigger size of the flats and buildings in South Mumbai, which could accommodate lifts in the buildings that most buildings in Dadar-Matunga could not. I have entered the ground floors of almost all the buildings in Oval Maidan as part of a heritage walk organized by Art Deco Mumbai Trust in January 2018 and witnessed firsthand the well-conserved Art Deco elements despite the lifts which have been installed recently. Therefore, residents from the Dadar-Matunga region and several conservation architects have stated that it was easier for the South Mumbai residents to hold on to their flats as it could accommodate expanding families and modern amenities like the lift. However, I also went to some redeveloped buildings in Shivaji Park, and the new owners who were former tenants in the old buildings complained about the low roof and the new layout of the flat. So they are clearly not happy with even the redeveloped flats. So this makes South Mumbai heritage movement a curious case. For today's talk, I mostly focus on civil society activism in both the precincts and the iconic built form of South Mumbai and intangible cultural heritage in Dadar and Matunga. For the purposes of my project, I limit my scope to the 4 neighbourhoods in Western Mumbai, used to call suburbs of Scheme 5 by Bombay Improvement Trust, that is Matunga, Shivaji Park, Hindu Colony and Parsi Colony. I could barely penetrate Parsi Colony, especially the Parsi community there. So my interaction was predominantly with residents from the 3 other neighborhoods. In the south, I focus on Oval Maidan and Marine Drive, which were developed by the Bombay Development Directorate. My interlocutors were activists, architects, bankers, doctors, engineers, environmentalists, homemakers, journalists, lawyers, librarians, professors, teachers, as well as writers, business owners like chartered accountants, textile business owners, etc. So accordingly, while some of them are salaried employees, the others are entrepreneurs, and both groups are fairly wealthy now. Most of these interlocutors were residents, while some were from beyond the neighborhoods, but have worked with the wider city population well enough to know the zeitgeist of urban life in Mumbai. I also spoke to several state officials. So any project on urban conservation has its riddles and conundrum hidden in the history of the city. So when I started my PhD in 2015, my first concern was to explore which epoch to study, which architectural style, etc. The journey was both tedious and enriching. I went to Bombay in 2015 for some archival work and interacted with some historians, and was both rubbished abjectly and eulogized by historians in the city for my project. I first delved in the written history written on Bombay for the past 200 years. The plague of 1896 marked an epochal moment for the city's planned urban development. I draw extensively from Nikhil Rao, Gyan Prakash, Preeti Chopra, Mariam Dosal, Prashant Kidambi, Eric Beverly, Thomas Blom Hansen, etc., to name a few, to construct the history of the two precincts. The Bombay Improvement Trust was formed in 1898 to restructure the city's infrastructure by clearing overpopulated neighborhoods by opening up new areas via reclamation from the sea and deforestation in the north, building working-class houses, wide roads to enable efficient and smooth traffic flow. The Bombay Development Directorate was established in 1918 and was entrusted with the Back Bay Reclamation Project. However, the plan was riddled with mistakes and oversights that the budget increased by 89%. And we have that whole Khurshid Nariman's controversy and public critique that was launched. So the project got stalled and eventually only started in the 1930s. There are a few themes that are pertinent here, the middle class housing being the first. Nikhil Rao cites a study conducted by students at Sydenham College in 1923, which states that there was no new housing typology for the lower middle class who were migrating to the city at that point. While the upper class had bungalows and the lower class had chawls, the middle class did not have a decent housing system. This led to the rise in apartment building, a typology associated with a particular form of sociality. However, this is not generalizable. Through my interviews, I realized that the building owners were upper class, while the tenants were mostly middle class or lower middle class. The owners of buildings in the Dadar-Matunga region were not as rich, as history reveals, and were mostly migrants from other parts of the country or the central districts of the city. The trust also bridged a cognitive chasm between the physical territory of the Bombay Island in the south and the northern parts of the city. The apartment style of living marked a conceptual transformation of Indian housing by shifting the toilet inside the residential unit. This marked a considerable shift in the caste-based view of bodily waste to accommodate the sanitary perspective. In its conception, these apartment-style buildings envisioned a coexistence of heterogeneous communities, however, thwarted by the actual dwelling patterns of homogeneous ethno-linguistic and caste communities. The principal style of architecture adopted was Art Deco, with the major technological breakthrough of introduction of the reinforced cement concrete, RCC, in the building market that enabled the feasibility of mass-built apartment buildings at low prices, and the arrival of the first generation of Indian architects in the 1930s, trained at the Sir J.J. School of Architecture in Bombay, revolutionized the phenomenon of building in Bombay. The newly built form represented an architectural shift from Victorianism to modernity, while Victorian Gothic architecture had an element of medieval monumentalism. Gyan Prakash says that Art Deco had the rationalism of industrial capitalism. The Back Bay Reclamation Project also marked a rise in the commercialism of the real estate. So I will quickly go through a few maps that I could gather from the few reports that I consulted. These are Google Maps of the Dadar-Matunga region. And these particular landmarks were like highlighted by my interlocutor, so I highlighted them even in the map. This map is taken from Art Deco Mumbai's trust, and the red dots, they're not red here. The dots actually mark the Art Deco buildings along Marine Drive and Oval Maidan. So this picture, this is reproduced with permission. I got this from Phillips Antiques, and this is before a Back Bay reclamation happened. So where we see this, the coast end is where land was reclaimed from the sea. So maybe later on, if we have time, I will talk about the description about which is what. Because of paucity of time, I will just move on to the next segment now. This is an aerial view of the Shivaji Park residential zone today. This I've taken from the UNESCO Heritage UNESCO site. This is Oval Maidan, and this is Marine Drive. This is taken from a New York Times article. The residents, my interlocutors in South Mumbai told me that most of the residents in these neighborhoods moved from other parts of South Mumbai and consisted of a motley group of people from different races, religions, and castes. An elderly male resident, also a highly acclaimed activist in the city, recounted that white Europeans and Jews, he categorically mentioned Jews as a religious category, Parsis, Hindu middle-class professionals, and merchants, etc., were his neighbors. In the Dadar-Matunga neighborhoods, the residents were mostly migrants from the neighboring states of Tamil Nadu and Gujarat and the hinterlands of Maharashtra. Some of the residents moved from the central districts in the city where they used to live in chawls. So the civil society action. What is a civil society? By the classical definition, it's a body that falls between the state and the family. It's a political body formed in contradistinction or in cooperation with the state. That is why I kept the state in the title. The proactive civil society in Mumbai is shaped by the inaction and corruption of the state. And I must point out here that each of my interlocutor, no matter who they were, student, homemaker, professor, activist, have discussed the inefficient government and why they felt the imperative to rise up to the occasion. When I started doing my fieldwork, the South Mumbai residents brought the restoration of Oval Maidan to my attention in 1999. The 22-acre open space separates the Art Deco layer of the city from the Victorian era buildings. It remains one of the landmark projects of the Oval Corporate Residents Association, or OCRA. They initiated a crowdfunding project where some residents have contributed as low as 500 UNR or 7 USD based on their means. And fundraising from benevolent corporate bodies like Sir Ratan Tata Trust, collected from the brochure published by the Oval, is how they crowdfunded. In my limited research on civil society in India, I found this case quite interesting, where the state consulted a civil society group to undertake restoration at other places, for example, the Cooperage Bandstand, and later entrusted OCRA with the responsibility of restoring Cross Maidan in South Mumbai. The Shivaji Park, situated at the heart of the Shivaji Park neighborhood, is a 28-acre open space and is also a Grade 1 heritage structure as the Oval, and hosts many religious, cultural, and sports events round the year. It is also used to host rallies and political gatherings, but residents in the region filed a PIL in the Bombay High Court in 2009, predominantly WECOM Trust, Walker's Ecological Movement Trust, and the zone, and it was declared a silent zone thereafter. Although the political rallies and gatherings still happen for 45 days a year, but the residents told me that the structures take way longer to be removed, so it never is restricted to 45 days a year. Now, I read a blog post commentary in First Post where noted architectural historian Mustansir Dalvi compared the two parks in Oval Maidan and South Mumbai, Oval Maidan in South Mumbai and Shivaji Park in Dadar, to highlight issues of inclusivity and the spirit of public space. He is critical of Oval Maidan as it is barricaded and has a filtered access, while Shivaji Park is more inclusive with a low curb that serves as a sitting area for hundreds of joggers, visitors, and lovers. According to Dalvi, Shivaji Park is a true representation of Jane Jacobs' idea of public space. However, I do not quite agree, because in my interviews with especially the Dadar-Matunga residents and the younger ones, they told me that the Shivaji Park is as well an exclusive space, especially for non-Hindu communities, given the political history of the neighborhood. So while the South Mumbai residents have restricted public usage of the park only to weekends and specifically for formal sports activities owing to the history of the nativist politics of the region, Shivaji Park is also not a safe space for people from all faiths and communities. I chose these two cases because they are, of course, important events in the history of civic action in the city, but also to highlight the public nature of the two spaces and how in India, the larger public appeal of a space or a policy or even an event is vital to gaining legitimacy. I will expatiate on this further over the course of this talk. So, I talk about these two litigation cases because they directly impinge on my research. The first one is Arun Chitale versus State of Maharashtra 2014. On 14th August 2013, a circular was passed by Mumbai Municipal Corporation mandating all development proposals to be referred to Mumbai Heritage Conservation Committee for approval. Now, several petitions were filed, and it was pointed out that in Shivaji Park, 17 out of 187 buildings in Hindu colony and Parsi colony, 200 out of 911 buildings have already been reconstructed. So the petitioners demanded that the MHCC clearance should be waived. And it also submitted that if 14 areas are added to the MHCC list, apart from the already 41 areas listed under MHCC, then it would make impossible for the builders and the owners to get an MHCC clearance in time, and they would have to wait for decades. The fact that several buildings were already redeveloped before the circular was passed highlight that it was too late. So nevertheless, the builders and tenants won this case. With regard to this, many activists and heritage enthusiasts told me that residents in the Dadar-Matunga region are paranoid of people taking pictures of their buildings as part of heritage tours or evaluation. In fact, some city activists have told me how people from the buildings have often come down and accosted them, snatching away cameras at times. City architects have also told me that heritage in India is more of a headache for residents as there is no incentive for preservation. As someone mentioned, you need permission to even put a nail in the wall. Preservation without incentive is a liability, so residents here often steer clear of that. A few young residents have told me that the older generation does not understand heritage. I thought about it for a while and spoke to my parents, realized that they do not care about architectural preservation either, especially if it is their own house. The Indian middle class, as depicted in academic scholarship, is invested in education, social mobility, and consumption. On acquiring social mobility, the middle class neighborhoods are increasingly becoming more aware of environmental pollution, hawker encroachment, green spaces, etc. But heritage preservation, especially the own houses, to the detriment of financial gains, remains a far cry. And I would like to point out here that the activists in the Dadar-Matunga region actually preserve the trees, the parks, even the intangible form of heritage, especially like there are some organizations which practice like traditional forms of classical music and art, etc. So they have preserved those structures and those art and crafts quite well. Even some sports activities like Malkham. The second case is that of the Federation of Churchgate Residents and others versus the Municipal Corporation of Greater Mumbai, 2014. All buildings on Marine Drive in A Ward in South Mumbai, located across the promenade, are safeguarded both by CRZ and the heritage laws, which mandate height and redevelopment restrictions. Now, as I stated earlier, in 2009, when Z Group acquired the Vasant Sagar building and the owners declared it a dangerous or dilapidated building and sought permission for reconstruction, in the events leading up to the court case, the need for MHCC clearance was dismissed, CRZ was amended favorably, and the municipality commissioner used his discretionary power to ratify the proposal for the reconstruction of the building to go up to 61.3 meters. The Residents Association at Marine Drive, the Federation of Churchgate Residents filed a petition, filed a PIL in the High Court in 2012. The residents won the case at the Bombay High Court. However, construction activity resumed at Vasant Sagar soon after, and the owner appealed at the Supreme Court, but the Apex Court held the High Court order. The spokesperson for the Residents Association told me that it was a temporary moral victory for them and the battle is far from over, owing to the clout of Z Group. The only hope for the residents was the UNESCO World Heritage recognition, which eventually came through in June 2018. Now, the purpose of analyzing the two cases is to highlight how the discourse of heritage has been negotiated by two groups of residents and corporate developers to realize two contradictory outcomes. So heritage is also a tool, a construction that is eventually deployed to stall gentrification. So there are many old structures in the city that does not attract much attention or civil society engagement, like Jogeshwari Cave, Sion Fort, and Mahim Fort. Heritage preservation is also riddled with overlapping jurisdiction of several bodies like the Archaeological Survey of India, Maharashtra State Preservation Board, and the Mumbai Heritage Conservation Committee. I'm not going into the details for the paucity of time, but sometimes that makes conservation difficult, especially for the state, because state actors don't know which falls under whose jurisdiction. And state is also like a multi-layered institution. It's a multi-layered organization, something that we academics do. We split the state into several parts. So not all of the stakeholders are in conversation with each other. And this is where the civil society stepped in. They are far more equipped than the state officials sometimes about the know-how of how to navigate the bureaucratic terrain and get the work done. The neighborhood politics in India is rife with such court cases where the civil society determines a fair and good use of public space in the backyards of their neighborhoods and sometimes beyond to keep both the state, political parties, and the urban poor at bay. Studying the difference in the priorities of every civil society group provides a fascinating mosaic of urban culture and politics of space. So while I attended a public lecture on Art Deco architecture and a couple of heritage tours in South Mumbai, I attended a Durga Puja celebration, a Bharatanatyam recital, and a fair in Shivaji Park. So the pictures before were about that. So the picture on the left is from a monsoon festival. The picture on the right, as you can see, Art in the Park, is the Bharatanatyam recital that I attended. This is a classic picture, also kind of attends to my thesis, which is on Jugaad, and I theorized Jugaad in my thesis. So this is at David Sassoon Library during Kalagura festival. The elephant is an installation, and the cat is real and human. So that actually is something very Jugaad, and I find this picture quite fascinating. If I ever have my book, I'll probably have this as the cover picture. I will briefly attend to the difference in the culture of the two neighborhoods. I listened to laudatory comments on the rich cultural landscape of Dadar-Matunga region. The park houses a plethora of sports clubs for cricket, Malkham, yoga, and scout societies. 3 temples, a towering equestrian statue of Shivaji, the memorial torch of Bal Thackeray, the founder of Shiv Sena, etc. On many evenings, I became a flaneur at Shivaji Park, marked by a riot of activities, gossip, sports, young couples romancing, and residents indulging in their evening walks. In a city with shrinking public spaces, Shivaji Park is one of the most notable green open spaces, known for its historic role as the seat of many significant cultural and political events in Mumbai, including congregations for national movements in colonial India. In the evenings, the bells in the temple start chiming along with the sound of conch shell blowing to sacralize the moment of Aarti. The friendly strangers have shared their pride in and love for the space while engaging in discussions about the traffic in Mumbai, hot weather, and corrupt politicians in the country, all of which are staple conversation topics for the educated urban middle class. The old residents have maintained the regular rhythmic performance and observance of the ritual practices of puja, annual functions, and observing major Hindu festivities to sustain the old character of the space, to perpetuate their sense of belonging. These practices, according to most long-time residents, have remained unchanged. Even the interpersonal relationship amidst the residents is that of an extended family, something that all the participants in these neighborhoods have glorified. They speak in the regional languages of Tamil, Marathi, Konkani, and Hindi. The South Mumbai civil society, on the other hand, have told me that their language of communication is mostly English. These residents represent a secular group of people where religion has been relegated to the private sphere. The architecture and edifices as constant reminders of the empire are of particular value, not only for the residents, but for the whole of Mumbai. Unlike other colonial cities, Mumbai's entrepreneurialism and built environment were founded on public subscription and philanthropy. Without a definite pre-colonial history and as a melting pot of people from diverse religions and nationalities, Mumbai conceptually and territorially, today's South Mumbai, fostered a secular spirit of equality, which was further cultivated by Gandhi's politics and preaching and created a culture of activism. For the South Mumbai civil society, this sensibility is not new that happened in the post-liberalization India. In their narratives, I often heard phrases like, "It was time to take charge. We could not sit and watch the city degenerate anymore. It is an idea whose time had come." The temporal framing is very important. I asked many residents many times over my interviews and conversations with them, when was this time? The particular moment or event, I never got a definite answer. I spoke to many activists in this neighborhood and learned that residents have been engaged in social development projects since 1980s here. This is also illustrated in the historical literature available on the city. As the former colonial core, and because of the close association between the indigenous elites and the imperial regime, the South Mumbai civil society inherited the Western repertoire of political culture and civic engagement. The criteria under which the property has been nominated in the dossier for UNESCO highlights an ensemble of various architectural styles, characteristic of different epochs, and influences like a Gothic revival, the hybrid Indo-Saracenic styles, and Art Deco. And the Oval Maidan represents several layers of history and physical forms of the city in one precinct. The dossier does not just argue for the Art Deco precincts to be nominated, but positions these precincts in the context of the larger milieu of South Mumbai architectural history and champions on behalf of the whole region to be preserved. So this propaganda in the media and the wider public sphere legitimizes the territorial claim of the residents and helps shape public opinion in support of the heritage claim. Marine Drive and Oval Maidan embody the spirit of public space and not signify the traditional residential neighborhoods. With the promenade that attracts hundreds of visitors every day, the movie halls, the municipality offices, railway stations, and commercial buildings, the South Mumbai neighborhoods attract dense footfalls from beyond their neighborhoods and the city throughout the day. Dadar and Matunga too are crowded throughout the day, but these are also typical business districts, nor as popular for loitering as the streets of South Mumbai. Also, the residential neighborhoods with their tree-lined quaint lanes do not remotely resemble the Oval and Marine Drive neighborhoods, abuzz with traffic and other noise. So my final section is on the collective public sphere of civil society, where I actually argue that South Mumbai civil society and its successful endeavor at preserving the heritage is because it involves the wider public. A dominant response of heritage activists to my question of why South Mumbai buildings are better preserved than the rest of the city asserted that the iconic South Mumbai buildings are in the public eye. So there are greater support and consensus among the state and the citizens about the significance of such buildings for tourism and the identity of the city. Therefore, there is an overlap between preservation and collective memory. Collective memories of riots, floods, and terrorist attacks and the resilience of the city against all odds and catastrophes are part of the city's identity, reproduced in the narratives of films, radio broadcasts, and everyday conversations. The colonial architecture in South Mumbai and its many districts of bustling social life in Kolaba, Kalaghura, and the various bazaars make it a classic public space in the citizens' imagination. Almost all movies shot in Mumbai will have the classic shots of the iconic buildings, the Asiatic Library, Victoria Terminus, and the municipality headquarters, the Flora Fountain, and the Gateway of India. Every day, hundreds of people flock at the promenade of Marine Drive to walk, hawk, loiter, or romance. Oval Maidan is at the heart of business district with multiple offices, cinema halls, and cafes in not only the buildings, but also in and around the precinct. In spirit, these are not self-contained introverted residential neighborhoods, but classic public spaces. The suburban neighborhoods in the Dadar-Matunga region, with their communitarian culture and domesticated public spaces, foster a spirit of public sphere which is permeated by a sense of one's backyard. Several residents took me out in their cars or on foot to show me around the neighborhood and showed me buildings significant for the community, like buildings where classical singers or intellectuals have lived and regional theatre actors. Most of these places are too esoteric for the counter public or the subaltern. Also, since the layout of these neighborhoods is intensively residential, none of the taxi drivers felt any belonging or attachment, and I had to use Google Maps to direct them rather than them leading me, unlike in South Mumbai and also in Bandra, which was my former field. These garden city neighborhoods make for self-contained, introverted urban villages with schools, colleges, parks, hospitals, markets, and temples, all in the neighborhoods. The inhabitants of the Dadar-Matunga region have gone beyond their houses to include the public spaces as part of their dwelling practices, marginalizing the subaltern population or at best share a utilitarian relationship. The built form educates and enlightens the public, creating a shared memory and identity. Because of their iconicity, people use these places for a range of activities: visit to create good memories, protests for greater visibility, hawk or vent commercially to reach a greater consumer base, and even use the iconicity to preserve the buildings or precincts against capitalist ventures, land reforms of the state, and entities that threaten to defile. It is through these buildings that not just the residents, but the ordinary citizens of Mumbai interact with the past and use them as anchors to make sense of the rapidly changing landscape and culture of the city. So in conclusion, the city is cosmopolitan with many urban enclaves and villages that have historically coexisted harmoniously. A city that is not tied to an ethno-linguistic identity, but these ideas were shattered by the two riots that rocked the city in the 80s and the 90s. Yet Mumbai remains beloved and beautiful, not because of its disciplined, sanitized spaces, but because of its unruly checkered spaces, where people from diverse backgrounds live chick by jowl in the spaces between elite neighborhoods and slums. However, South Mumbai disrupts this spatial segregation. When I was first doing my fieldwork in Bombay between 2017 and 18, I used to frequent the library of Urban Development Research Institute, UDRI, at Kalaghora in South Mumbai. Kalaghora is an old district dotted with Victorian buildings, photocopy shops, catering to the High Court lawyers and college students. Because of the nearby Bombay High Court and Elphinstone College, parked cars everywhere, in the parking lot, alleyways, and on the sidewalks. Eateries of various scales, from roadside tea stalls and low-budget South Indian cafes to high-end delis, would dot the street. The construction work for the underground railway was underway, and the whole city was complaining about the detours, deadlocks, and traffic jams in South Mumbai. As a result, the main road was blocked and the footpath was barricaded with tall tin sheets to deter pedestrians and hawkers from spilling over to the road. With hundreds of pedestrians, I would walk every day from Kalaghora to the Regal Victoria Terminus train station to catch a train at an optimum time, before it would get uncomfortably crowded. As I would walk down one of the elite districts of Mumbai through the narrow lanes and the Victorian arcades, flanked by swanky cars and street vendors selling sundry items, I would often spot friendly cows along with well-dressed hoity-toity lawyers and office-goers, the menial laborers, lower-class workers, and students. At lunchtime, the cows would either munch on a great deal of grass or defecate, unfazed by the bustling madness around, before sauntering through the streets, causing some more traffic jams and roadblocks. Henry Lefebvre calls such spaces counter spaces, spaces that challenge global city and capitalist aesthetics. The Indian street, even in the most elite districts as Kalaghora, is an epitome of counter space, which accommodates multiple publics without marginalizing or bracketing the disadvantaged population. One finds beggars, gaudily dressed transgender people, heckling to extort money, street children, street vendors, and animals, all huddled in the same space, along with the middle class and the elites. By privileging such spaces as democratic and using it to conceptualize a public space, I am by no means glossing over the structural inequality, the violence, the gross human rights violation that these minority populations face. But at the same time, such spaces are spaces of hope and livelihood, of informal networks and friendships, of inclusion and legitimate dissent. As Anjaria notes, that there is a democratic potential to Indian states that allow a wide diversity of urban practices, as well as potential to generate greater awareness of harsh realities and inequalities of urban life. What do clean sidewalks hide better than poverty? These are not just democratic and inclusive spaces for the poor, but also life centers of democracy, enabling civil disobedience and political critique of the state by the middle class, thereby preserving the spirit of free speech. So in conclusion, I would draw again from my thesis where I theorized the term jugaad. I discussed the emergent challenges that residents and civil society groups are faced with and the discursive ways the middle class civil society engages with the state to galvanize urban governance, reinventing and improvising their politics. There is a need to recalibrate politics and engage in ethical activism to foster inclusive and democratic public spaces and urban culture. I thank my supervisor, Professor Daniel Go, Professor Andrew Harris, who was also my thesis reviewer, and Ms. Sudha Ganapati for giving me wonderful feedback for this talk. My friends Shomadrita Das and Debonita Biswas for helping me with the talk and when I was doing my fieldwork. And my wonderful interlocutors, I've posted their name and there are a lot more. So please forgive me if I've not been able to include them here. I've included everybody's name in my thesis. So that brings me to the end of my talk. Thank you so much.
Kamalika, that was really, really delightful. I mean, I think you've given us so many insights about the layers in which Mumbai operates. And I mean, I think we keep hearing so much about the spirit of Bombay. You know, there's so much of it is spoken about in cinema, in music. We talk so much about the spirit of Bombay, but I think you've sort of tried to capture it empirically, which I think is really commendable. We'll open the session to a few questions from the audience, but before that, I had a few questions for you. I was wondering, of course, in the beginning of your presentation, you've sort of delineated that these were assumptions that you were going into your research with. But which would you say was the most surprising for you that you found was untrue of the assumptions or like notions that you went into your research with?
Thank you. I think the economic category thing. So when I began my fieldwork, I definitely thought that South Mumbai people are much more affluent than the residents in the Dadar-Matunga region. But more than when I started my fieldwork and I started interacting with people from both the neighborhoods, I realized that the residents in the Dadar-Matunga challenged this theory a lot more than even South Mumbai residents did.
Okay.
Yeah. So so some of these, like some of my interlocutors in the Dadar-Matunga region are building owners. And they told me, like I stated earlier, that some of their tenants do not even live in the country anymore. And they have like, so I actually know like in terms of even their education, so where they studied, etc., and achieve phenomenal social mobility. So yeah, so that is one of the like myths that was even shattered for me, like because even I thought that South Mumbai people can afford to do this, but it turns out that Dadar-Matunga residents can also afford to do it. It's just, and that's why this whole like word greed came up a lot of times in my conversations with them.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you say. I mean, the word was so striking for me, and I wonder if as a researcher, you ever have to worry about offending your interlocutors? Because, I mean, of course, this is a very loaded adjective. So I'm sure if there are people from Dadar-Matunga who are also in this talk, like it's a bit jarring to hear such an adjective be attached to a certain neighborhood. So do you have to worry about things like that when you're producing your research?
Yeah, so that the whole greedy aspect is not my analysis. It is something that I have heard from my interlocutors. So that's why I clarify that, you know, it is more like people in the Dadar-Matunga region. They do not have the sensibility, like I said, that I spoke to my own parents, and you know, I also asked some of my friends, and like I grew up in Calcutta, and I know how the middle class generally functions in these parts, and you know how the ethno-linguistic middle class, like because these middle class are also are like very attached to their ethno-linguistic identities.
Right.
So yeah, for them the intangible cultural heritage part are a lot more important than architectural part. So it's not that people in Dadar-Matunga region are not proud about their neighborhoods. They are. And they have like time and again told me that it's a beautiful place to live in. And that's why I also like discussed the vignette on my experience of like flaneuring in and around Shivaji Park, because it is like a classic public space, and with so many people like in afternoons who gathered there, evenings. So it's not I'm not like imposing any judgment. So through this whole talk, I'm also not trying to say that the South Mumbai civil society is anyway better than the other civil society. It's just that the South Mumbai civil society has been able to preserve this whole ensemble. And it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site thanks to the civil society, because I know as a scholar, as like a researcher, how post-colonial state functions. Yeah, so post-colonial state, actually, when I spoke to state officials, they hardly have any idea, like sometimes. So, and there are just so many like bureaucratic hurdles for state officials that it's very difficult for them to also, like, even if they want to, they cannot bring about certain changes. So it's mostly civil society in India. That's why they kind of galvanize urban governance, because the state is so fragmented and the various rungs of the state do not talk to each other.
Yeah. And it's also, I mean, from your presentation, you were talking about the temporal aspect of the responses that you had from your interviewees. They were talking about it's high time. If the state is not doing it, it's high time that we step in. And it was difficult for you to sort of like put your finger on what this time is. It was this vague temporal category. But I'm thinking about, I mean, this is my personal sort of assessment. I'm thinking about even the themes that are emerging out of Bombay cinema at the time, like in the 70s and 80s, during the emergency or the events leading to the emergency. So do you think that is a sort of landmark event where sort of this beginnings of sort of dissatisfaction or dismissal of the state? Do you think that could be something where it starts off?
Could be. I don't work on like Bombay cinema, and not very sure about. But yeah, that could totally be. So if I comment on that would be like overstep on my part, because I am really not really not an expert on cinema in Bombay.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I think, like I said, that I don't think that for the people in South Mumbai, it is something that happened in post-independence India. I think they were already engaged. So Prashant Kidambi, who's a historian on the city, he has like a very famous paper on public interest litigations. And he talks about how people, even in colonial Bombay, like indigenous elites, have used that extensively to bring about changes in governance. So, of course, I don't in the paper does not clarify, and I've forgotten actually that paper also. So exactly which regions these people are from, but based on the history that I have read, clearly South Mumbai people were a lot more involved in urban governance and a lot earlier than people in the Dadar-Matunga region started being involved. Right. And the other thing is the colonial government also did not intervene in the religious lives of the people in Dadar-Matunga region. Whereas, and this is something that I read in Rahul Mehrotra Sharda Dwivedi's book, that when these Back Bay Reclamation project was planned, it was planned as a secular neighborhood. It was clearly mandated in the plan that there should not be any religious structure. It has to be a completely secular space. So that in the design only, that was written in. So
okay, yeah. It's. I mean, I think in your presentation you talk about the emergence of the apartment style living, especially for the emerging middle class in the city at the time. And there is, I think you used the word heterogeneous.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering about whether, I mean, there are certain caste realities that percolate, class realities, even realities of faiths that percolate even in these supposed sort of heterogeneous living arrangements. So in your current research, when you spoke to interviews, did you see any of those sort of realities reflect?
In the Dadar-Matunga region, yes. So because these are, so when I asked my interlocutors, every time I started my interviews, I would ask them, how will you describe this neighborhood? So in Hindu colony, Shivaji Park and Matunga, most residents actually use the word Brahmin, Marathi Brahmins and Tamil Brahmins. to designate their spaces. So predominantly like Marathi Brahmins, but there are other, caste categories as well, who are like, so I did not delve into the whole caste aspect for my project, also because it's kind of, one is it would have shifted my focus. The other is I did not want to ask people their castes. Unless they voluntarily told me. So but clearly, like based on the descriptors that they have used for the neighborhoods that they stay in, it is kind of obvious. And the other thing is, if you read literature on Indian middle class, you would see that there is constantly this idea that who actually gets to achieve social mobility. That is also there's even the idea of privilege is like very variegated. So that's why South Mumbai people are privileged, but who gets to attain social mobility in India is also very intricately tied to caste groups. And if you look at like the people who are in like tech jobs, like like scientists, they are mostly Brahmins. So so that is also something. So that reality, and that's where how I've triangulated my data, like whatever data I did not ask, like whatever things, like questions I did not ask my interlocutors, I kind of used like supporting sources to kind of argue that that's why they could attain so much social mobility.
Right. And a final question from me. After that, I'll open it to the audience. I'm curious about what it is about Bombay that draws your research interest to it. I mean, your MPhil and your graduate studies have also been sort of focused on Bombay, and your as you go along with your research interests, I think you're finding newer angles that you can sort of explore. So what do you think makes this city so distinct that that excites you to study more about it?
I'm in love with Bombay, personally. But as a sociologist, what I found very interesting is even the subaltern, the poor in Bombay are more powerful than they are in other cities in the country.
Okay.
So that's something, and because I have read academic literature and I remember feeling so like uncomfortable. So for example, there is this very famous work by Lisa Weinstein on Dharavi called The Durable Slum. And that word clearly tells you that the poor here are durable. So they cannot be as easily evicted, or they cannot be as easily like marginalized as they can be in other parts of the country. The other thing is, I have also seen civil society here talk about like the ill effects of capitalism, which I have not seen elsewhere. So how Lila Fernandez actually conceptualizes like the new middle class is by associating the new middle class with the neoliberal turn of the socio-political terrain of India. But Mumbai civil society, and especially like South Mumbai civil society, some of these people, when I've asked them that what do you think are some of the biggest problems that challenge the Mumbai society today, and they've said things like this is capitalism at its worst.
Right.
And some of these activists, I have seen that how they are also kind of engaged in like neighborhood activities on the one hand, but then like some slum redevelopment, like mainland activity, like on the other hand, like where like some rehabilitation authority is kind of involved. So also like this fragmented positionalities of the civil society where which is very different from Delhi or Calcutta. The two cities I'm more familiar with, not very familiar with other cities.
It's really interesting you say that, because I mean, there's such a perception of Bombay being the sort of financial capital, and there is like this incomprehensible degree of wealth flowing in and out. So I mean, despite that, you're saying that from your interview, from your interactions, you've heard civil society say this. So that's, I mean, I suppose it's heartening in some senses.
Yeah.
I will now open the floor to some questions from the audience. We have a couple that have come in. Do you think that most buildings in Dadar-Matunga suffer because of owner and tenant tussles and problems arising out of those, versus Marine Drive, where most buildings follow a flat ownership structure?
Okay, so thanks. This question is actually very relevant for me, also very close to my heart. So there is no definite answer to this question. I have spoken to like a substantial amount of like people in both the regions. So while there are a lot of cooperative housing societies in Oval Maidan, a lot of buildings in Marine Drive are still rent control protected buildings. So it's a myth that all South Mumbai buildings are cooperative housing societies. And some of these owners in South Mumbai have told me that they are not too happy because their tenants are not contributing towards preservation of the buildings, and they are having to pay for the preservation and maintenance of the buildings. Whereas in some buildings, I've spoken to the tenants, and they have shared that they are like it's a very a very, very harmonious relationship that they share with the building owner, where everybody cooperates and contributes towards maintenance of the buildings, even though the rents are like very, very low. So, for example, I read an article. The market rates for the rent in those buildings are like 60,000-70,000, and people are paying less than $1,000.
Right.
In Dadar-Matunga region, on the other hand, it's mostly the tenants. The tenants are, so I spoke to a couple of building owners who are actually preserving their buildings, despite the tenants not contributing at all. And some of these tenants are very wealthy, like they are MBA graduates, and they're working in Manhattan. So they have like flats in Manhattan, and they have like shifted their parents to the outskirts of the city because these buildings are collapsing. And they know that they would profit from the redevelopment of the building, either some form of compensation or a free flat somewhere, things like that. So it depends really on the dynamic between the building and the tenant. In some cases, the tenants are problematic. And problematic is not my word. Problematic is the word, a term that some of the tenants are using against the other tenants. That I wanted to preserve this building, look at the deco elements, but this flat is lying empty. They're not even here. They have moved to Bangalore or somewhere else.
Okay. The next one is from Parul. How do you increase awareness about heritage preservation and make them care about it to open wallets for? And how do you open wallets for preservation, basically?
Sorry, I missed that question. Come again?
This is from Parul. How do you increase awareness about heritage preservation and make them care about it to open wallets for preservation?
Okay. So I am not, again, like as a research scholar, we generally don't get into like prescriptive, we don't generally give out prescriptions. I'm not a policy specialist. But in my opinion, I think the way Art Deco Mumbai Trust is doing this is fantastic. And I have actually like quoted Atul Kumar sir in one of my like thesis chapters, where he actually says that, and it's kind of remarkable that he says that, sometimes he gets messages from like auto rickshaw drivers who have started identifying deco elements in the buildings that they live in, somewhere like in the central part of the city. And that is kind of like, so the kind of work that Art Deco Mumbai Trust is doing is remarkable, because it's not just like restricted to the elite population. It is also kind of percolating to the other parts of the society. So I think one way of doing this, like, so for example, my parents also did not care so much about, although like my parents are like quite, they understand art and culture quite a bit. They're Bengalis after all. So, but this architectural preservation, they're not very interested in. It's not like they don't appreciate like Victorian architecture, but they just would never be involved in this. So I think if they attend a couple of these lectures and start understanding maybe the value of these buildings and the fact that, so many new buildings are actually crumbling down, these structures, despite being built like 100 years ago, are still standing.
Yeah.
So maybe people would see more reason. But again, like neoliberalism is really the villain here. So yeah, so if somebody is a tenant and can, I don't know, get a lot of compensation, like 20, 30 lakh rupees without doing anything, then no matter how much you educate them, it's just very difficult to convince them to preserve architecture. But yeah, I mean, we can still try. I mean, I don't want to be pessimistic.
Yeah, I guess it's difficult for people to be able to see a personal stake in it. And I suppose the problem is that everyone wants to see a personal stake in it.
Yeah, exactly.
Do something about it.
Yeah. And the most important thing is the government should incentivize.
Yeah.
So this is something that I have heard from my interlocutors in the Dadar-Matunga region, and they have time and again harped on this, that even if they have wanted to preserve the buildings, there is no incentive. Rather, it's a liability. So really the state has to intervene, and the state will not intervene just like that. So again, it's on the civil society to make the state intervene in this.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the civil society also, after all, has limited resources in front of state machinery. The next question is incidentally from Atul. South Mumbai entrepreneurs shared a convenient relationship with the British, born from common interest of furthering trade and business. Yeah. Does this serve as a basis for South Mumbai's sensitization to the urban form and its conservation?
It does. But again, like in my thesis, something that I have realized that these people were also not too keen on, the suburbanization scheme, the indigenous elites, because they had buildings in South Mumbai, and if the suburbanization scheme would happen, which eventually happened, they would lose out on the rent that they could accrue from their buildings in South Mumbai. So it's also kind of like interesting that they were the first ones to actually protest colonial government's plan to embark on this, on like the suburbanization scheme in the northern part of the city. But having said that, I do believe. So like there are a couple of accounts, Macaulay, I think it's a very famous account on the indigenous elites where Homi Bhabha actually quotes this and says that, so I actually believe that South Mumbai civil society is this, where they say that the colonial government wanted a group of people and a group of indigenous elites who are like Indian in color, but British in tastes. So the South Mumbai civil society actually is this kind of a group where in color they are Indian or South Asian, but their tastes were like quite educated and like trained to understand and appreciate the Western way of life.
Yeah, as you say, I suppose that is also where that perception comes from of South Mumbai being the more elite of the two categories.
The other very important thing that I forgot to mention earlier is also like women empowerment. Like women in South Mumbai started working and getting engaged. So like South Mumbai civil society, that is a defining feature. So, and we all know like Naina Katpalia, Shirin Bharucha, Swan Kohli, they have done like incredible work in the region. So, and they are all women, and women from that generation, like, elsewhere, I don't know, even in the country, I don't have too many examples to actually cite. So definitely not in the Dadar-Matunga region. So that is also a very, very important, and that also tells you that, like even the socio-cultural dynamic of the neighborhood, not just the economic and political aspect. Yeah.
That's actually a really interesting point you bring up. I'm going to move on to, we have a couple of more questions. This is from Vishaka. The homes in Dadar-Matunga are much more modest in size and design compared to the buildings in Oval and Marine Drive. Did this also play a role in how the residents valued their property?
So like I stated earlier that it did, especially in terms of like accommodating expanding families and like, newer needs. Because like I said, that some of these, not practically all of these like families in Dadar-Matunga region, their children attained phenomenal social mobility and wanted to put their parents in buildings which had like modern amenities. Now, most of these buildings cannot like accommodate a lift. Some of these buildings can, like I've seen some bigger buildings where they could accommodate a lift, but otherwise they could not. So that is one feature which I could not like kind of challenge. But then again, I have visited a couple of redeveloped buildings, or I have visited like these like displaced tenants who have moved on to new flats in and around the region, if not exactly where the building used to be. And they are not at all happy with the new like flat that they have moved into. So they were showing me that the ceiling is lower, and I remember this particular like owner, she was telling me that my son complains that the older building was so much better and we were so much closer to Shivaji Park. This is like a pigeonhole, and like even we were promised like greater, bigger FSI, but this is how the builder cheated on us, etc., etc. So that's why they, I mean, so it's not like even the new buildings are a lot better than, and if they were like completely content and satisfied with the redeveloped buildings, then I would have still given them given the whole redevelopment drive a bit of credit, but they're clearly not happy. And it's also not like South Mumbai residents have parking spaces. Again, something that these people have constantly told me. So parking, South Mumbai people are, I don't know where they park their cars, but they definitely could not build parking spaces in the buildings. It's only the lifts that they could install. So, yeah.
The next one, this is an interesting one. Bombay is such a diverse and stratified city in terms of demographic. So who eventually has a stake in urban conservation? Someone commuting in the locals every day from deep in the suburbs may not be so taken with heritage conservation in South Mumbai. So according to your experience and interviews, who do you see is participating in the politics of urban conservation?
Yeah, so that's a brilliant question, actually. Thank you. So like I said at some juncture that the whole discourse of heritage is also socially constructed. It also depends on like where you stay, what you are kind of trying to achieve by getting a heritage recognition. So South Mumbai residents incidentally told me that they did not know so much about Art Deco even like 10 years back. This is a new phenomenon. So I have also spoken to a couple of historians who hail from that neighborhood, and they have also told me this is pretty new. So I argue that, and this is also based on the interviews, it's not something that I came up with myself. So they did not want the fabric of this neighborhood to be destroyed, and they did not want the neighborhood to be gentrified. So in other parts of the city, especially in the Dadar-Matunga region, and this is the anxiety that I was talking about, the anxiety of the middle class, that these neighborhoods are gentrifying and redeveloping, and sometimes the let's say the former owners are living in these redeveloped buildings with newer tenants, with the newer owners, which is like a skyscraper, but they're not happy. Sometimes they have to use the service lift, and this is again like So this also kind of answers Vishakha's question that. So there are a lot of these other realities that kind of inform redevelopment as well. So these people, the owners who are now the former owners who are now having to use service lift, they're clearly not happy with this new situation because they do not fit in to the fancy building that have come up and the fancy residents who have moved in. So when I was doing my research, my flatmate actually brought this to my attention once, that, people who commute like from the suburbs of the city, somebody like who commutes from Dombivli, why do you think this person will be interested? Yeah. But I'm sure this person in Dombivli also hangs out once in a while in Marine Drive. Yeah, and that's why I feel that that's the success of Marine Drive lies in, and which is why that I finished with those two vignettes that why Dadar-Matunga region they do not get as much footfall or they're not as popular is also because one is because they do not have these like iconic buildings. But even if you have let's say Marine Drive tomorrow sanitizes the whole space and restricts it will lose its legitimacy for the larger public. So if it completely limits and restricts the people, and in 10 years time it will crumble. So that the next generation will not be able to relate to the city. But today, the South Mumbai, the whole precinct actually is also like an anchor for people who are also coming from the suburbs to kind of make sense of the rapidly changing city. And all cities are changing. So they are falling into like redevelopment. And like now every time, like in 6-7 months when I go to, I have not been to Bombay in like 2.5 years now. But even like when I was doing my PhD in the initial years, I at least used to try to go to Bombay every 6-7 months whenever I got a break. And I used to see like these new cafes and restaurants and things coming up. I used to live in Chembur. And I used to definitely like make time and go to South Mumbai and Bandra, to these iconic locations, just to kind of make sense, to kind of feel that familiarity with the city. So for a person in Dombivli, I'm sure there is something of importance in that neighborhood.
Yeah.
For example, in Dadar-Matunga region, people showed me Ambedkar's house and some several buildings that are of like personal significance to the community, and they have preserved those buildings very well.
Yeah, I'm thinking of Marine Drive, and even this idea of, this is a fancy building that I have no stake in because it's owned by somebody else.
Yeah.
But I mean, there is still some sense of ownership with the facade of the building. You're walking on this promenade and you're looking at this beautiful building. I mean, at the end of it, it makes you feel something, right? It makes you feel like you belong in the city. One final question I'll take is, what were your biggest challenges in getting people to open up and be candid about the issues that you were discussing? As you'd mentioned that you'd chosen to anonymize a lot of your interlocutors. So did you have any trouble in sort of like having them open up and talk about the issues?
Thanks for that question. None at all, actually. And again, something that I have written, I've written in my acknowledgement section that when I like in the first phase of my fieldwork, I was so worried and so like apprehensive about doing my fieldwork with South Mumbai residents, because in the popular understanding and imagination, South Mumbai people are this like really elite group of people who are snooty, and like I come from a middle class family like myself, so totally don't belong there. But they did not make me feel like that at all, and they like literally, that's what I've written in my thesis, that they just like welcomed me with open arms. And there are some people that I don't know, I've like bothered so many times, like Naina and like so many people. So I will not even get into the details. They've been so nice to me. I'm like very, very grateful for. I would not have been able to do this research without their help. I've actually called some of them even from Singapore. So when I started writing, there was some data gaps and I was not too sure how to like make sense of that. And then I called them back. And so, yeah, they've been so accommodative and wonderful. So yeah, I mean, my whatever I thought South Mumbai people were, at least I did not get that kind of a vibe at all.
That's really so wonderful to hear. Yeah. I think that's a good note for us to go towards the conclusion of our talk. We're close to our 7:30 mark. So I think on this note, we can conclude today's session. Thank you so much, Kamalika, for graciously sharing your insights with us. Thank you. I would like to take this 1 second. Thank you so much for helping me with this. Thank you, Atul sir. Thank you, Art Deco Trust and Art Deco Mumbai Trust for giving me this opportunity. I was just telling Suhasini that in 2018, I attended a public lecture, and to be on the other side of the table, it is just like feels surreal. And I was so nervous today. But yeah, seriously, it's a matter of like huge honor for me as well. Thank you so much. No, we've really enjoyed hosting you, and I think you've raised several provocations and questions in all of our minds. I'm at least coming away from this presentation with a deeper ethnographic sort of understanding of the city. And I have, a lot of questions that I'm going to go explore now. So I think it's an important exploration, and I really hope that you can pursue your inquiries further. I'd also like to thank our audience for joining us today from several parts of the world. Thank you for supporting us, and I hope you enjoyed this talk.